Vocational tertiary education has been in the spotlight recently after Penny Simmons passed her new legislation, but she's unwilling to show the data to back it up. Here to talk with us about it is Labour's spokesperson for that, as well as Rainbow Communities. Welcome, Shanan. It's a pleasure for you to be back on the program.
Kia ora, my friends. Good to see you, and thanks for having me.
So, how are you? Um,
Yeah, well, we're on a recess week this week, which is a good chance to get out and about with our communities. And I think sometimes when we're in Parliament, we get caught up on parliamentary political issues of the day, and it's a good test when we come back to our own community and see what's important for them. And I guess what they're still saying is, you politicians really need to focus on the things that are important to us. We don't think the government's doing that, so that's our job.
In the intro, I mentioned about you're waiting to see the data that on this new legislation that's been put through. So, what are you looking for? Yeah.
This legislation has been long awaited. Minister Penny Simmons, it's well known that she's had a real vendetta against Te Pukenga. Te Pukenga was established under the Labour government to resolve particularly the financial viability issues that the sector has been challenged by for a long time. And we went through sort of a couple of years of bedding that in. Penny Simmons made a commitment in the election that she would disestablish Te Pukenga, and it's taken her, almost half the term to come back with an alternative piece of legislation. On the face value, it doesn't look too different to what's in place at the moment, and in my view, probably an unnecessary change to disestablish Te Pukenga. She probably could have just lifted and shifted a bunch of the functions, which would have had less impact to staff and students. And also, she's opted for what I believe is a more expensive model.
With these changes that she's looking at bringing in, what does it mean for the future of the sector and for students who'll be looking for potential vocational training in the future?
Well, what we've seen and what's being reported at the moment is a series of job cuts across the sector, particularly in polytechnics. We've seen that across Welltech and Whitireia, who service students in the Wellington area. We've seen that at EIT across Te Tairāwhiti, Gisborne, and Hawke's Bay. And so it's more instability for the sector, really, which is the concerning part. Last week, I quizzed the minister about her, if she's worried about this, what she's going to do about the job losses that are being reported on. She said it's not her responsibility, it's the responsibility of the institution alone. That doesn't really demonstrate the leadership that I want to see for students and staff. They've gone through a really difficult period over the past couple of years. Her plan and legislation really kicks the can down the road now, and pushes it out for another couple of years before staff and students get that stability. So I'm worried about that.
In terms of that stability, you mentioned before the financial elements of it. I personally see vocational training in those kind of providers as a service, not a business. So it's not about turning a profit, it's about providing skills to increase productivity and increase workflows and increase workforces. The changes that are being proposed sound to me like they're driven by the idea that this is something that has to make money. Am I far off the mark on that?
You're pretty close, actually, and that's one of our major concerns, is it's a step towards greater privatisation of our public education system. That the minister does use the language that institutions are a business rather than polytechnics or institutes as we know of them. But, again, what underlies the problem here is that it's not the sector hasn't been financially viable for a long time. That's what we set out to resolve as a part of Te Pukenga. I understand that Te Pukenga is now running a surplus, which is everything we wanted it to achieve. And now the minister's coming in with an alternative plan, but she has refused to share the financial information available to her with myself, who's scrutinising the legislation. And she's removed that right of the public to be able to see actually if she's got a better plan, then she needs to provide all of the information, including the fiscals.
You mentioned that in your note that you sent us for this interview that the Pacifica and Maori population, as with many things in this country, are significantly undervalued when it comes to this area of society. What would you have to say about that in more depth?
Yeah, institutions are outraged by this decision that the minister has removed equity funding for Māori and Pacific learners in our education system. We know that they are the most underserved. It's a fact. It's a part of the Tertiary Education Commission's strategy. But for a long time, there's been investment in additional initiatives to support the pastoral care and the academic achievement of Māori and Pacific learners in our system. The minister has ignored all of the advice from officials and from institutions on this. There's no evidence to support the decision that she has made, and so that will result in worse outcomes for Māori and Pacific learners. That really bothers me because alongside that, she's erased references to Te Tiriti o Waitangi and Te Ao Māori within the legislation. They've done that also as part of the overall tertiary education strategy. So the ability for Māori and Pacific to learn in the way that's best for them isn't a good outcome, and she's got to be held accountable for that decision that she and her government has made.
I've got some stats here in front of me around this issue. The current unemployment rate's around 5.5%, I think 5.2, 5.3% for the general population, but the unemployment rate for Māori and Pacifica is sitting at around 10%, which was something that was predicted when the fair pay agreements were put through. If you don't have this, this is one of the outcomes that could look at happening. And of course, the government removed that. When we see the long-term effects of those kind of numbers, how does that impact communities? When you go, well, the training opportunities aren't necessarily there, the money's better overseas. How does it impact the wider community, knowing that they've pulled these out specifically and said, no, we don't need them?
Yeah, we know when unemployment is high that tertiary enrolments are high too. And despite being given advice on this, the minister hasn't responded, or in this year's budget hasn't put any additional funding in to fund tertiary training providers to educate those learners while they're out of work. Here's another example where the minister isn't looking for any advice. On top of that, over the past 3 years, year on year, we have 9,000 odd less apprentices coming into the system than we had under the Labor government. So that doesn't include, all of the tradies that have gone off to Australia. But year on year, we're losing $9,000. They cut the apprenticeship boost scheme. They've cut funding to the Māori and Pacific Trades Training Scheme. And so I just don't understand how we can grow tradies for a construction sector that desperately needs workers. Who is the government and the minister listening to?
When COVID hit, I was working with a recruitment company that worked with engineers. And they were finding that they had this real problem with outreach in particular because the people who work in that field are older. They've been working in it for years, and we weren't getting younger people coming through for that training. And they were really excited about the idea of that first year of free fees because it's an enticement to get people coming through, and they were starting to see those numbers come through. That removal of that first year of fees free and putting it into the third year, I realize we probably don't have the data yet on how that impacts numbers because it's such a recent change. Have you had any feedback on the ground about what that impact is starting to look like?
Yeah, many students can't access tertiary education full stop because there's no support mechanisms to even get into the system in the first place. Shifting that to third year is, that's targeted to a different group, and that's a different argument. The reason why Labor put their first year fees free scheme in was about access. I still believe that that's required. And that we took a universal approach. This government doesn't like a targeted Māori and Pacific approach, so I wonder why they don't support a universal approach. But also under this government is that they've enabled tertiary institutions to increase student fees up to 6%. So they're making it harder and harder in a cost of living crisis for students to access tertiary education, while there's high unemployment. And, we've got to be worried about that.
Do you do you mind if we switch over to the your rainbow portfolio for a bit? Okay.
Yeah, no worries.
So earlier this week we put out a thing on the 4th page about the constant attacks leading into the local government about, astroturfers coming out of the woodwork everywhere and pushing it. How disturbing is it to still see this happening on a day-to-day basis? And I know you happen to comment on the post that Paul put out.
Yeah, my heart always goes out to people from our rainbow communities who are wonderful advocates to many of our most vulnerable. And so, whether that be Paul or, whether that be Jennifer from Patha recently, that the hate that is being spread online, is not the Aotearoa New Zealand that I think many people believe, that we should be. Second to that is that, I do hold the government responsible for a lot of this behaviour. If we look at Winston Peters and his behaviour in the House against myself and Benjamin Doyle, that he really thrives on spreading hate to the rainbow community. So, leadership in this country, we believe, has got to be inclusive. It's based on New Zealand values, but that's not what I'm seeing in this country.
With the bump in the road I came across this week, it's driven very specifically by a group that is really, really anti-rainbow. That they are incredibly nasty people, and I stand by everything I said. I call them a hate group, and I don't see them in any other way. As the public, what can they do to show support for those people that might be impacted by this group that are out there cancelling school pride events, for example?
Yeah, I was particularly sad to see many of our schools cancel Pride because of the safety risks that they were presented with. My local college up the road, Northcote College, that they were another victim of online hate as a result of the Pride event that they held. What was really encouraging in that sense is that the community really stepped in, put their positive comments in there, and showed their support behind the school taking on this initiative, because schools have got to be inclusive places. All of our rangatahi need to know that they're accepted and loved for who they are, and that builds a strong community. I like to think that we can ignore the haters out there. I know that's easier said than done, but most of all, their hate needs to sit over there. The more that we can ignore it, which is my strategy with Winston, is better. But we have one goal at the moment, and to be clear, we're only 6 odd months out from election year. Our one goal is to change this government, because the absolute punch down on rainbow communities, on Māori, on Pacific, on people with disabilities, on women, is not the Aotearoa New Zealand that we believe in. And that narrative and the discussions in the local supermarket and out on the street, people are really rethinking about this government and where we should go from here.
I mean, I tend to ignore the hate when people, because I know it's not true, when people come up to me, because I know it's all at risk of being in the public eye nowadays, of saying, people are taking advantage of you. This person taking advantage of you. Don't listen. They're brainwashing you and all that kind of thing. So do you think this is the most under pressure our disabled and rainbow communities have ever been?
Well, my biggest concern in this hate is the use of predatory language upon the rainbow community. That's hurtful. It's not accurate. It takes away the relationships that we have with our children and our whānau. And quite often it's put up on social media. Compare the levels of abuse from the rainbow community between churches, and it speaks for itself. There are no concerns there. That as rainbow people, we have the right to love our family, to engage with our tamariki in the normal ways that any family in Aotearoa does. And so that hate in that particular language is just awful and unnecessary. And I'd like to see a little bit more leadership from the government calling that language out, not encouraging it.
So, as we speak, I've actually just been getting text messages here from a medical practice in Wellington. Anti-trans protesters have raided a doctor's surgery down there, and the police have been called in because they've gone into the surgery. They're starting to harass the staff and the people that are there, which is obviously a step too far. That is, that's a dangerous thing for them to do. How do we juggle free speech requirements versus hate speech? Because this is something that the government has very specifically said they don't want to touch. It was something that Labour was trying to look at and then got a lot of pressure on. How do we have those conversations around those differences and the harms that they can cause?
Yeah. Well, let's be clear. Free speech is not hate speech. The moment that your discussion, your opinions are becoming hateful and are impacting on others, and shedding and positioning people in a negative light, that is hate speech. That's not your free speech opinion. And the second part is about where you share your free speech. And if you expect to speak negatively of any particular group, including the rainbow community, in a public way, then that can easily cross that line to become hate speech rather than just your free speech. If you're in your house, you're sharing opinions over the kitchen table, that's all up to you, and that's within your own private environment. But the moment that it impacts on others, then it becomes concerning, and that's when we must stand up against it.
The fact that they're coming after me is quite disturbing, but it's all part of being in the public eye, I suppose.
That's right. We all, take the odd hit because of who we are and the lives that we lead, chosen or not. But this is where we normally expect a government to stand up on every New Zealander's behalf, to build a society, that is safe for everyone. And that's just not the leadership that I've seen from Prime Minister Luxon, particularly Winston Peters when he was the Deputy Prime Minister, but this government overall.
What I would say is please continue to bring up these issues in the House, even if they are falling on deaf ears, because we need more advocates to join us like yourself. So please.
Yeah, that's right. But also alongside that, we've got to maintain our focus on the things that are important to our rainbow communities. And we come back to again for Labour, it's jobs, health, and homes. That we can't lose sight of the bread and butter issues that are important on a day-to-day basis. This government promised respite from cost of living. They haven't achieved that. That is still top of mind for every single person in this country.
Let's briefly finish with.
I was going to say, I was at Countdown yesterday. I bought butter yesterday, and I don't do a lot of baking or anything like that, but I bought it because it was under $9 a block, and it's like, this is have to.
It's a bargain.
Which is
Bargain
ridiculous
it,
in a
mate.
dairy producing country.
I was gonna say let's briefly finish it because you've been at the farmers convention the last few days as we're recording this. So how's that been? Because there's a real focus on getting woolen carpets into homes and all the kind of stuff. So what did you see when you were down there?
That's right. I had a great day down at Field Days at Mystery Creek. I met lots of people. I was particularly interested in talking about the vocational training legislation because we know that we need to grow thousands of future farmers for our workforce, given the GDP contribution to our economy. And we're not quite meeting the number of farmers that New Zealand needs to train year on year. It's quite clear that farmers don't tend to vote for the Labour Party. That's okay. But it is important that we maintain a relationship with them because when we do get back into government, we've got to work together no matter who you voted for. And that's something that we believe fundamentally as a Labour Party caucus, that when you govern for everyone. That's not the style of leadership that we've seen from this government, but it's certainly the government that we want to be.
Free News reported that the support for the Labour Party is around 3% at the moment.
With farmers.
With farmers. So how do you?
I should point out actually, I don't know if you guys are aware of this, that research that they did into that was only with farm owners and managers. It wasn't actually with the farmers who are working out there. So it's obviously a very heavily skewed towards federated farmers who paid for the research. But yeah, it's been put out there in the media as this is normal. This is actual information where it's heavily skewed.
I'm just gonna say, how do we get that up?
Yeah, as I said, that traditionally farmers, particularly farm managers, are unlikely to vote for Labor. They tend to go more conservatively to National. But, farmers are important to Labor. We know we need to have a working relationship with them. They're an important part of our economy. And, so we've got to maintain that relationship outside of election years. Because when we are government, we want to work together on the things that are important to get New Zealand's economy going.
Any other bit
I
before
have
we go,
one final
Paul?
question. One final question. Do you know what the mystery of Mystery Creek is?
It was my first visit to Mystery Creek, and they didn't tell me what the mystery is.
So I should just leave this open-ended and see if the chat can get it. It's a mystery. Nobody actually knows exactly where the name came from, and there's like 4 or 5 different theories around it, including lost treasure, like lost stolen treasure from the 1800s, a whole bunch of buried planes from World War II. There's a whole bunch of different rumors about what the actual mystery of Mystery Creek is, which makes it a mystery. It's a weird little historical fact for everyone.
Good to know.
Hey, thanks for checking out today's video. Make sure you like, share, subscribe so you get more updates as we go along. We deal with these guys for the rest of the year.